Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, July 18th, 2017 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll call roll. Let me remind you, please make sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the mic for the record. Commissioner Anderson.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie. Commissioner Crane.
Present.
Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Sarsfield.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do have a quorum. No personal appearances scheduled this evening. One item on the consent agenda, which is acceptance of minutes from our June 20th, 2017 meeting. And unless any of the commissioners have concerns about the minutes, I would either entertain a motion to approve consent agenda or accept minutes of the June 20th meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Anderson.
make a motion to approve the minutes, June 20th minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion to approve minutes of our June 20th, 2017 meeting as presented by Commissioner Anderson, second by Commissioner Meiske. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 4, 7 in favor. Any opposed? And Mayor, I assume abstaining?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Nothing this evening under old business, so we will move directly into new business. Our first case this evening, case 17021, Discover Vision Site Plan at 1018 West Foxwood Drive. And would the applicant like to come forward and present your case to the commission, please?
Good evening. My name is Guy Gromberg with Guy Gromberg Architects, and I represent Discover Vision Center and I-Center here in the greater metropolitan area. And they're looking to build a 4,500 square foot building as presented to you in your drawings in your packet. We don't have too much of a presentation, as the staff will cover most of that. We did bring a material board that will go over brick, stone, glass, commercial looking building. There is a little bit of what's called cow wall, which is a certain type of glass. It lets translucent light through, not direct light, and it'll glow a little bit at night. It's an insulated panel is really what it is. So we agree with all staff comments and recommendations. I have the civil engineer here too also to answer questions that you may have, and thank you for considering our project.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gromberg. Mr. Grass or Mr. Carteret, would you give us the staff report, please?
Thank you, sir. Before I get started, I would like to let the commission know that this evening, normally we're able to broadcast the staff report and images to your screens. Tonight we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, so we will not be able to follow along that way. If you would, I'll try and reference the page numbers and figures in the staff report as best as possible so you can follow along. But there will also be images projected behind you all on the screen if you would like to look at it at a larger picture. So as the applicant indicated, they're representing Discover Vision Center, who's looking to build a 4,500 square foot office building, medical office building here in the city of Raymore. The project location is right on the corner of Highway 58 and Loris Drive in the Remington Commercial subdivision. And if you follow along on page number 2, we'll start there with an aerial photograph which shows the location of the building. You can see it's, like as I mentioned, right on the corner of Loris Drive, Remington Plaza, and West Foxwood Drive on the vacant lot that exists between the two developed lots. The first photo of the property here shows the view looking from the adjacent property, which is the State Farm Keller Williams office building right next door. It's looking west, so you can see the view looking west, and that's showing the I believe it's a pediatric building there to the west of that property. The next photograph on page 3 is going to show the view from 58 Highway looking north, so looking across 58 Highway at the vacant lot. So you can see there the two developed lots on the east and west sides of the property, and the vacant lot right there in the middle. And then the last picture is going to show the view from the parking lot of the pediatric building to the west. You can see it's stubbed out a little bit there. That's where actually the parking lot of the proposed building will connect eventually, as well as an entrance off of Remington Plaza to the north. So there's really good circulation through the site. You can sort of get a picture of what that might look like in the future. Existing zoning, the property is Zone C3, Regional Commercial District, and a medical dental office is, or a medical vision office is a permissible use in that district. And it's surrounded by office commercial to the north, east, and west, and a church use to the south, just across Highway 58. It's about just under 1 acre site, 0.97 acres, 42,352 square feet. And it is in the Remington commercial is a replat of the 4th plat, lot number 8. The growth management plan found in the future land use map in the growth management plan identifies this area as appropriate for commercial development. And the major street plan classifies Foxwood Drive as a major arterial and Loris Drive and Remington Plaza as local streets. Since this evening is not a public hearing and did not require an advertisement in the Journal, so we did not notify any neighbors or advertise in the Journal for this evening. As I mentioned, they are seeking site plan approval for their proposed building in the Remington Plaza, or Remington Commercial Subdivision for their Discover Vision Center. We've included in the staff report the site plan requirements that they were required to meet when they submitted their staff or their submission for your review. Moving on to previous actions on the property on page 7. The Remington Commercial 4th plat was actually originally approved by the City Council of Raymore back in 2003, but since it was never recorded, it actually expired on March 8th of 2004. Developer again brought that forward to City Council later in 2004 and is approved on July 12th. The final plat was recorded just on July 14th of 2004, and it has remained vacant since. The engineering division has reviewed the site plan and indicated that it does meet all of their specifications and complies with all of their engineering guidelines. As far as staff comments, we've included the development standards that apply to this lot. You can see a 2,000 square foot minimum lot area, 30-foot setbacks from the front, 20-foot from the rear, and 10 from the side. And the building does comply with all of those standards. There aren't any special use standards or conditions for a building of this sort. Moving on to parking, for a medical or dental clinic, it recommends 1 per every 600 square feet. With 4,580 square feet, a total of 8 parking spaces would need to be provided. On their site plan, they've indicated a total of 46, excuse me. Initially, I believe 32 of those will be developed at the same time as the building, and then they've allocated some space down the line for about 14 additional spaces should they need them. So the proposed site plan is in compliance with the parking requirements. It meets and exceeds those. With landscaping, 20% is required to be reserved for a landscapable area. Their plan calls for 32% landscaped area, so it is in compliance with that regulation. And a total of 5 trees and 13 shrubs will be provided to give some screening between adjacent properties and to improve the property aesthetically. Building design, as the applicant mentioned, they did submit a sample of all the building materials that will be included on their building for your review this evening. We've decided that it does meet the building design standards found in the Unified Development Code. For pedestrian access has been provided for the building. There's currently sidewalk that exists on both Remington Plaza Court and Highway 58, and the applicant has included a pedestrian connection that connects both of those sidewalk links, as well as provides circulation to the front door for visitors to the site. The fire district did review, or I'm sorry, let's back one step. Signage, they did not submit a master signage plan as part of the site plan application. It's not approved as part of the site plan review. However, they did include it on the site plan for illustration purposes, and based on that, it does meet all of the landscaping and signage requirements for a site plan application. As I mentioned, the fire district did review this application, had one comment. They were concerned about the limited access. As I mentioned before, they are connecting to an existing parking lot to the west. And with that comes a little bit of limited access from the turning movements that are required through that parking lot. So as a condition of the approval, they have asked that they widen the entrance off of Remington Plaza Court to better accommodate the turning movement of a fire apparatus. So we weren't able to get those corrections made by the time we were able to reach a conclusion with the fire district. So those aren't shown on the plans that are before you all this evening. But as I mentioned, that will be a condition of the approval that will have to be shown on a site plan that they will need to submit before any permits are issued. Stormwater management, they will be treating and collecting the stormwater on site, and it will be discharged into an existing pipe that exists to the property to the east. We've had discussions with the owner of that property, and they are in agreement with the plan to do that so long as it is treated on site before it is discharged into their facilities on their property. Street lighting, they've submitted a street lighting plan as a part of their site plan, and it does meet all of the City of Raymore standards. The trash enclosure will be located on the west side of the building, and it will be composed of the same materials as the building, most likely brick or stone or some sort of similar material of the office building itself. And then the same goes with the screening of any mechanical equipment. They did not necessarily show the location of that on their site plan, so again, that will be another condition of the approval that will have to be shown on the revised site plan before that is submitted before they are issued any permits. And as I mentioned before, site access, the main access will be off of Remington Plaza. That'll be the primary entrance of the building. However, there will be another entrance/exit through the building that exists to the west that will exit onto Loris Drive. Staff did provide proposed findings of fact for your consideration this evening. And if you skip along there to staff recommendation, as I mentioned, we do recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission accept the proposed findings of fact and approve case 17024. Subject to the 11 conditions that follow that recommendation. So prior to commencement of any land disturbance activities, the state of Missouri and City of Raymore land disturbance permits shall be obtained prior to any commencement of any grading or land disturbance activities. All erosion control measures should be identified on the site disturbance plan, and required land disturbance permit must be installed prior to grading any actions on the site. Prior to the issuance of any building permit, the building construction plan shall be approved by the building official, and the applicant shall submit a revised site plan showing the following changes, and I mentioned some of these already. There will be the relocation of a striped crosswalk that shows the mid-parking lot crossing. There was a little bit of a miscommunication between staff and the applicant as far as where we wanted to see that, which is why it's not correctly shown on the plan this evening, but that will be shown correctly at their next submission. And as I mentioned, the fire district was requiring that they widen the entrance off of Remington Plaza so it can accommodate the turning movement of a fire apparatus, and then they will need to show the location and screening details of all mechanical equipment on site. Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, all accessible parking spaces must be correctly identified on the site. 2 of the accessible parking spaces shall be served by an access aisle that meets the minimum requirements of ADA as well as the City of Raymore standards. And then, as I mentioned, if the electrical transformer box or any utilities exceed the minimum requirements for screening, those will need to be screened according to the requirements of the Unified Development Code for the City of Raymore. And then all work shall be completed in accordance with the details shown on the submitted site plan. And then there's 3 more perpetual conditions that will exist throughout the entire lifespan of the project. Prior to the removal of any erosion control measures, the contractor must obtain concurrence from the city before they remove any of those measures. And then a signed copy of the weekly rain report must be provided by the applicant to the city, and the owner must immediately notify the city of any illicit discharges that enter the stormwater system for the City of Raymore. As I mentioned, the engineering division did review the application and it indicated that proper facilities do exist, and if you want to see any of their specific comments, that is located on the memo at the end of the staff report. So to conclude, as I mentioned, staff does recommend that the Planning Commission accept the proposed findings of fact and approve case 17024. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them, as well as the applicant.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Grass. I think before we get too far into the discussion, could we see the materials board there? Can we pass it? Assume it's not too terribly heavy, or those are not too terribly heavy.
And just for clarification, are you able to scroll through your staff report? I'm not sure if you guys had the color copy of the renderings that the applicant provided or if they were black and white in your version. If not, I can project those on the screen up here as well so you can see them a little bit better.
Yeah, color, good.
They're in the color version?
Yeah, that's working. Thanks. Is commission okay if we start discussion while we're passing materials aboard, or do you want to see that first? Okay. Yeah. it's, Didn't want you to get started and then distract you too much. Commissioner Anderson.
Sure. Can, at least for a question for the staff, can you walk us through the discussion in terms of the, I guess, specifically the material here? I guess voicing one of my concerns is, you know, with this building in a particular location, it really stands out and it's really no cohesion. I think staff knows that's been my big concern, that we tend to build buildings and it's one-offs, and especially along 58 is a concern that there's no cohesion, or at least some type of tie-in to other structures that's there. So having something like this is totally different. This will work well within the Galleria, but I have some concerns in terms of the overall materials that were decided to use on that. So kind of walk through that. Was that any discussion that was had based upon some of the materials that were presented here?
Absolutely, great question. Staff didn't really have any formal discussions with the applicant about the materiality of the building. Certainly, we were thrilled of the high quality of the materials that they presented. As you mentioned, there are several buildings along 58 that, you know, aren't the best looking buildings, and there's some that are very nice looking. To my knowledge, there aren't any requirements of this architecture to match of any of the buildings that exist around it. But that could be, you know, something that the applicant looks further into before they move ahead any further, is you know, looking how this building relates to the ones that surround it. Certainly the building next door to the east, the State Farm and Keller Williams building, that's a very nice looking building. You know, not to say that this one isn't. It's a very nice looking building the way it's proposed, but perhaps something that matched a little bit better with the surroundings would be a better option. So I'd be happy to hear, you know, what the opinion of the applicant might be. Like I said, they're not required by any means to change the design of their building, but I'd be curious as to if they had any opinions to that as well. So if the applicant wouldn't mind discussing that, that'd be much appreciated.
Absolutely, great question, and conversations I had with my client and their desires. If you think about the new Kay Jewelers building, this is a knockoff of the Kay Jewelers building, and they also like the Commerce Bank building. It's just a little bit farther down on the west of that, on the north side of the road, there's a Commerce Bank. They were looking for a commercial building, brick, steel, glass, okay? They weren't looking for what's called a glorified house. The building to our east is a glorified house, 2x6 wood studs with a sloped roof. The building to our west is a metal building. It's metal siding, it's a metal building. So we're sitting between two extremes. Their thoughts and our thoughts were, we wanted to bring and raise the quality to a commercial building, brick, steel, and glass. Really, the only deviation from the Kay Jewelers was the introduction of the cow wall, which is really just translucent glass versus clear glass, translucent glass. With the West Sun, if it was clear glass, we would have tremendous, tremendous heat gain with that. And in lieu of just making it stucco or brick, the cow wall was introduced. And it's very, if you would Google cow wall, you would see it in many, many buildings. And it's K-A-L-L-W-A-L-L, cow wall, the type of material being used. So that's the thought process we went through as we designed the building. And the client and I drove up and down 58, you know, all the way to the other end to Scott, and all the way down to 291, back and forth numerous times, looking and chatting about what they were looking for. So it wasn't, we just didn't throw it together. There was a process we went through.
And I want to recognize that, and you're spot on that, you know, in terms of the design aesthetics, yes, you meet all the requirements, but at least me as a one voting commissioner here, I would love to see some type of attempt to tie that together. Instead of saying that I just want this is what we want, I would love the applicant to consider, you know, buildings to the east and building to the west, and how can we tie that together? I think from this here, I think something very small, being introduced some type of, you know, brick that's similar to the building to the east to tie that together. My concern is, and I drove by there multiple times once we received the packet there, and looking at what we received here, that will be a building and a structure that will stand out on its own. and I'm looking for some type of cohesion there. Thus the request, what was the discussion there? So at least right now, if the applicant, at least for me, could resubmit to have some type of, tie-in to kind of tie that together, I would appreciate it.
Kind of along that same line, if you're finished
Yes, can I see that again?
with the question. Mr. Grunberg, is there a design standard out there for Discover Vision Centers? And I know you're not a McDonald's, but, clearly some chains have design standards, and of course, those evolve over time. But I just wondered if Discover Vision Centers tried to maintain any consistent architecture on their locations, or is each one unique?
They're unique in that they're commercial buildings with brick, stone, and glass. We've done 3 other, there's probably 5 others out there that are all commercial buildings, not a metal building, not a shed-roofed, glorified house-looking building. So they are flat-roofed. There's one in Olathe, KCK, Independence, that are all brick and glass. This is the smallest of the buildings that we've done. Most buildings are 20 to 30,000 square feet, so they're a different type of building. They're a 2-story building and have a different look. This is what I would call the prototype of the 4,000 to 5,000 square foot building that they're looking at property in Liberty. They're looking at property in Smithville, property in DeSoto. So they're looking to take this and make this the prototype, but it's the first of the smaller version for
Okay.
them.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioners, we have a bad habit of letting the applicant sit down and then running them back to the podium. Do you have any more specific questions
Yeah.
for the architect?
Just one last comment. So, yes,
Commissioner Anderson.
I totally understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but did some research, and I was looking at your building in Kansas City, Kansas, which kind of falls in line to what my thinking in terms of some of the stone that was used, or brick that was used, or stone that was used, actually. It's not a lot, but it just a little bit, again, ties that in, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I don't think I need to put that up there.
In the elevation, there is stone in the elevation, which is that bottom.
Totally understand. I'm
Okay.
just looking for something that will tie in. That's the key word here.
Tie into
The materials, specifically the stone that was used in the building to your east.
Okay.
Natural stone.
That's a natural stone? I'm confused.
It is. So I don't know if we have a picture of the building, the State Farm building in question. The natural stone that was used, or the brick. Okay. Everyone's shaking their head, but I don't think you understand what I'm saying. So do you know the material that's used in the
Yeah.
State Farm building?
There's brick and stone on the next, yes.
The type of stone that's used in that building there.
Yeah,
If we could potentially, again, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Is that we could use a minimal port of that, what they use on the east, and tie that in somehow to what you're proposing here. Again, my concern is just, yes, it's a prototype, but it really stands out, and it's really no cohesion there. And driving up down 58, it will be just that. It will be like a sore thumb. Even though it's a beautiful building, it's great. If it was in the Raymore Galleria, that's great. That surrounding areas, it would tie in because that's the same design aesthetic. But putting that there, I have a concern. Okay. So I'm trying to present a compromise here. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to go a little different direction for a minute, if I may. Before I forget, Mr. Gress, on page 13 of the paper packet, first paragraph under staff recommendation, if I'm not mistaken, we need to correct the case number before this goes forward. I'm seeing 17024 there, and I think our case is 17021.
Yes, sir, you are correct. Thank you.
Let's make sure that's fixed before we go to city council. My other question actually concerns the layout of the building, parking lots, et cetera, on the site. And I think probably the easiest way to point out the question, on page 1 of staff report, the building is actually shown in the, I'll say in the lower right corner, which would be southeast, parking lot in the middle, and then there's an open space to the north. I think that's probably, I'll call it a retention basin or something. It's got some elevation, but just looking at the 2D paper map, it looks like the site potentially might accommodate a second building at some later time. So I'm just wanting to know, is that a possibility? Would the site in fact accommodate, and I know we have requirements for landscaped areas and all that, but, and also stormwater retention, but would that northeast corner of the lot potentially accommodate a second building at some point in time?
I do believe that it could. You are correct in saying that right now it is being proposed as the detention pond. Certainly, if they were to move forward several years down the road and propose to build a building there, they would still be required to meet the stormwater detention
Right.
requirements.
In some
It would
other
be-
fashion, perhaps.
Sure, yes, correct.
I was just curious.
But that is, I believe that would be, a buildable area that a second building could stand on eventually.
Okay. Now, again, the case before us is a single building located as shown on the plans. I just, we've learned over the years to try to look a little further ahead and not just be narrow view and get blindsided. So thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Groenberg, do you have any comments on
We
that
had talked about
potential?
that the, thank you, the parking lot that goes off to the side, we talked about pushing that north so they could just expand here.
Oh,
But
another possibility.
They have no intention of expanding. They have 10 exam rooms. They really only need 6.
Right.
So they've built in their expansion into this building right here. And if they ever went over this, they would just open another location.
Oh,
So
okay.
from the conversations with my client, there is no
Not
plans to
likely.
put a second one likely. And if you did, you'd have to go to underground detention.
Right.
Which makes it
More
so
expensive.
not cost-effective that you'd never do it.
I think it was the fact that the parking shown clearly exceeds the minimum requirement, but then there's potential additional parking, and
Yes.
so that just got me to thinking about, potentially
I
what
mean,
is a longer range
I will say
plan.
that they have 12 employees that will be here. So they have 12 cars for employees. So to only require 8, it's the kiss of death. And what
Yeah.
I've learned over 30 years of doing medical, the worst thing you can do is not provide enough parking for those patients.
True.
So we need 5 or 6 per 1,000 square feet for them to function correctly. So that's how we calculate it based upon past experience and the heavy load of employees. They'll have 12 cars for just employees that are there
Right.
during their maximum times. So that's where the parking ratios come from.
And I obviously am pleased that you're taking a more conservative approach. I do appreciate that. Okay, I think that's all I had for the minute. Other commissioners? Questions or comments? Yeah. No. Commissioner Pfizer.
Okay, I'd just like to say, I really like this building. I think it looks nice, and I don't mind the fact that it doesn't match the one next to it, because I like to see variety in architecture, and I think this, to me, it looks nice, and it does sort of tie in with the new development down the street. So I think in my opinion, I think it'll be a nice addition. That's my comment.
Right. And I'm sorry, I'm having to go back here. If I did not mention for the record that Commissioner Bowie arrived about 7:08, and welcome. We're glad you're here. And so we have the full commission at the moment. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, of course, Commissioner
Just
Boyd.
curious about, it says in the package there was no signage. You haven't come to conclusions about signage. What was some of the conversation around signage, in particular facing 58, Highway 58?
So to answer your question, a master signage plan isn't required to be submitted as part of the site plan application. They showed it on the building for illustration purposes only, as far as where they would be, and kind of a conceptual idea of what they would look like. Depending on the recommendation this evening, when they come forward for a sign application, they will need to submit a master signage plan showing what that sign would look like. They're allowed, certain square footage or area on the front of the building, depending on where it's facing, where the front of the building is in relationship to the street. But that will have to be submitted eventually when they come forward for that permit, is a master plan showing more in-depth information.
Yep, thank you.
A little more, typically what we found is that it gets way more technical at the signage. When you get a separate sign permit, it works much better for everybody if the actual sign company does the drawings and the calculations and submits all the details. What we've shown meets the requirements of the code, but I have found over time that the actual technical people submitting and making, working directly with staff and getting it all correct.
Right.
So we had talked about that, and that was the angle we had taken.
Good. So the illustration, I'm looking at page 28 of the electronic packet, but the color page, I think we should consider the signage shown in those elevations to be, for instance. It's not, that is not a part of the site plan per se.
And not that it matters, that's what will be submitted. What you're seeing is
Right.
they'll dimension it and do it all. That's the intent.
Yeah.
But I understand you can't approve that here at this time.
Right, thank you. Appreciate that, I agree. All right, it's kind of quiet down at this end. Any comments from other commissioners? Mayor?
No entrance, and I think I read this right, no entrance on the south side,
Right,
right?
Correct.
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. Two entrances, though, which with the widening makes fire district happy.
Absolutely.
So it's not limited to one. It does have two ways in and out of the parking. Okay.
Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, could I ask a question of Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, of course.
I wanted to
Mr.
touch on
Gross.
your point about the design of the building, and I understand where you're coming from, and I can respect that opinion, but to get some consensus from the commission, I'd like to better understand your point. I understand your concern with the materiality of the building. Is it a combination of that and the form of the building? Certainly there's a difference between the two, and they're both fairly modern in nature and a little bit different from the buildings that surround it. So for clarification on my end and perhaps for the applicant, I'd like to distinguish between those two, if you wouldn't mind.
I want to make it clear, I love the building.
Yes.
I think it's a great building. But I think if as I drive up and down 58 and I visualize that building being there in between buildings to the west and the east, the building will definitely stand out. I think it's our charge as a commissioner not only to make sure that we look at the code, of course, with assistance from staff, but again, we have to look at it holistically in terms of what is our overall master plan in terms of what we approve, the design aesthetics, et cetera. Totally understand it meets that because this is stone here, but again, I'm not looking to say, hey, you need to put a big stone wall there. Just something small that though, Commissioner Anderson a bone that there's something there that we can tie that together there. And that's all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Love the building. Love the building. I think it's cool, but I think it will simply stand out to what's there. And that is concern is just like it will stand out. And it's like, what are we doing here? There's no cohesion that's going on here. So that's all. So just my original question that was directed to staff, what was that discussion? Is it, yes, we meet design standards, that's great, but was there discussion in terms of tying east and west together somehow, some way? Okay.
Great. Thank you.
If I can join the discussion, I'm going to need some help with my memory. I don't believe it's been too many meetings ago that we had a similar discussion. Well, not too concerned where it came from, but I wish someone would remind me of which property that was where we had a similar discussion about piecemeal architecture. And, it was a case where I think what the commission wanted was, and it may have been a residential. I think we've seen this several times over the past year, but what commission wanted was like a master plan for a large area development. And in those other cases, as I recall, because it was subdivided a long time ago, what we were getting were individual parcels coming to us piecemeal with no overall master plan. So I think, Mr. Gress, apologies to the applicant. I'm not trying to take this out to world hunger, but, you've hit a nerve that has been a subject of past discussion fairly recently, where, my comment probably last time was, ideally, if we were starting with a clean slate and a bare piece of land and a master development for a shopping center, I think it would be easy to address Commissioner Anderson's concerns. But Remington Plaza was platted a long time ago, and individual entities have bought lots, built buildings, and so I'm not really sure, and Mr. Fleming, feel free to jump in here, but I'm not real sure how far the commission's authority goes to trying to gain consistency or compatibility among adjacent sites or sites within the development at this time.
Mr. Chairman.
I can answer that.
Okay? We'll go to Commissioner Crane for a
I
minute.
believe the discussion that we had was with the Pathways building and how much different it was from what some of the other things look. Personally, I think that a different type of building is much nicer than row after row after row of the same looking thing. A lot of companies have an identity built into their building. And as such, if we're going to attract businesses to the city of Raymore, we need to realize that, and in my opinion, we should encourage it. And then, as I told the mayor, for all of us country folk who give directions by landmarks,
Oh, no.
it sure helps when you're telling somebody from out of town where they need to go.
Where that big oak tree used to be.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, that wasn't caught on the mic, but I think Commissioner Sarsfield just said, and where the big oak tree used to be, if I,
And again, Mr. Chair,
yeah, Commissioner Anderson.
I want to make it clear
Continue
to
the
the rest
discussion.
of the commission is that, and again, this is why it's not just the commission of Leo. It's not.
No,
That's why we have multiple peoples here, commissioners here. But, as Commissioner Crane had mentioned, that he prefers to have, some flavor in terms of having a different aesthetic there. That's just great. Me, yes, I don't want to have that, everything look the same. I think I call it Stepford communities. I don't want that either. Just, I circle back to my comment, if we can somehow tie something in, some type of a common thread. Yes, we can have some different type of buildings there, but if there's a common thread, again, this is my engineering hat come in, that kind of ties that together. It's like, okay, I see what's going on there. If not, I think the risk is, in which we have been going on, outside of areas that are brand new, we will continue along that same line of having totally different buildings. You can drive up 58 and you can say that's different, that's different, that's different. There's really no buildings that actually look the same on 58. So I think I always say a lost opportunity is a lost opportunity. So just my comments.
Right, and
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Gress, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sarsfield.
I personally like it because even if we drive down 58 or any street in 100 miles from here, you could go down before you even see any business sign on the building. For the most part, you can tell which ones are the banks a block before you even get to them. You can tell which ones are the restaurants, whether it's a burger, whether it's Chinese, whether it's so forth, et cetera. And I'm not pinpointing to find that there's only one with the golden arches, so to speak, that stands out more than any other restaurant. But no matter how you would decorate a building, a Walmart's still going to look like a Walmart with a big 10-foot W in the front of it and starting with it. So I look at it this way: as far as someone driving down the street, I am looking for that building, and everybody has, the next 75 buildings all have, I'm being facetious here now, white siding on it. They're going to go crazy looking for the business they want to pull into. it has a distinction to be by itself, just like the restaurants do, just like the banks do, you know, the big pull-in marquee and everything else. And it stands aside from it, and it also brings in, like my person to my right said, that you're not putting a hindrance on a new business that might want to come in with, let's say, not an extreme super modern building, but hey, here's a place that we're not going to be hindered in doing something. We're going to meet all the codes of the city. We're going to make everyone happy. We're going to build it the way they want to be built, but we're going to show that we are willing to accept different people with different styles and different shapes, you know, and bringing other businesses into our community that we always need. I mean, this is great that we have an actual eyeglass company coming in that's national, I think. As I say, some of the other restaurants and so forth, they're coming in, and I think it's great. So whether it looks totally different, and as far as the plaza where everything was changed and just new, that's like row businesses. This building still stands alone, just like the new State Farm beside it, the banks beside that, and the pediatrician dentist to the left of it. They're unique in their own setup because that's the type of building they have. That's convenient for their purposes of business. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you, Commissioner Sarsfield. Any other comments, discussion?
I have a question.
Commissioner Pfizer.
This is for staff. Just to clarify, we're just voting on the site plan, right? We're not really taking any action about the actual building, right? Or are we? I mean, other than the location of the building, but the design of the building, is that part of what we're focusing on?
Yes, that is
I mean, I know
correct.
we're focusing on it, but.
The design of the building is sort of lumped
Okay.
into,
I just want to clarify that that's part of it, okay?
valid question. I would have had the same question, honestly. But yes, the site plan is sort of lumped into the design of the building aesthetically as well. So you're voting on the appearance of the building this
Okay.
evening as well.
Okay.
Right. And at the moment, I'm looking in the index for what I would have thought were under design standards, and I'm not finding them real easily. What did we call that? How about maybe 440.01? Is that perhaps?
You can reference page number 9 of the staff report as well.
Oh, shoot, that's too easy. Okay. Maybe that's why it seemed familiar. Page 9, 440.01. So yes, building design standards are a requirement of site plan, and staff, feel free to jump in here, but in my understanding, those design standards are intended to break up the monotony and keep a building from being one big, long, flat wall. They're actually intended to promote some diversity of appearance in the building, but again, this is a site plan for a single tract, and I don't believe our design standards currently go beyond a building. They don't go to consistency within an area or architectural compatibility.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, you know, as being part of the economic development team, of course, we're excited about Discover coming to our community. And having reviewed the materials initially, I'm not as concerned as Mr. Anderson is with regard to the differences in the facades of the buildings in the area there. The colors seem to be fairly similar in nature. The actual design of the building is different than the ones on either side or behind it, and but everything else is different in that area too, but all seems to come together through a natural neighborhood kind of concept that allows for it to be, as was mentioned earlier, eye-catching, yet a little bit different for folks to be able to discern between buildings. So I'm not as concerned about that. I actually think that this is, they've done a great job of keeping it as a frontage property that kind of is contiguous to the properties next to it. So it's, with the materials that I viewed, they're not as diverse as one would think because of the different shape of the building. So I think they have tried to do, and have taken, as they stated, taken into consideration what we've done at the Gateway area with the Cadence project. So I like the project too. I agree with Commissioner Fizer that it's a well thought out project, and I think it'll be actually I think it'll be a very great asset to that area, and will allow our 58 highway to commercially grow as its original intended purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Turnbow. I'm perfectly willing to continue the discussion, but I wonder if any of the commissioners are willing to propose a motion on the case, and we'll see how the commission votes.
Sure, I can move forward with that if you'd like, sir.
Of course, Mayor Turnbow.
I would make a motion to accept staff's recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission to accept the staff proposed findings of fact and approve case number 17024, Discover Vision, one.
Yes,
17021.
please.
There you go.
Discover Vision Center, thank you. Site plan, subject to those conditions as outlined in their report.
Second.
Second.
Okay, I think I heard Commissioner Crane first.
Since you couldn't remember my name.
Well, you all always fool me down there. I hear voices, but I'm
Wait till
never
next
quite
time.
sure who. Okay, so let's see if I can rephrase briefly. We have a motion on the floor by Mayor Turnbow, second by Commissioner Crane, to accept staff proposed findings of fact on case 17021, Discover Vision site plan, subject to all of the noted conditions, and approve the case, if I didn't say that. Mr. Fleming, did that sound halfway legal?
Sorry.
Oh, did that restated motion sound halfway legal?
I think you covered it.
Okay. So is there any further discussion on the motion? All right, let's see how the vote goes. All those in favor of accepting staff proposed findings of fact and approving case 17021, please raise a hand. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Opposed? Commissioner Anderson. And that leaves no one to abstain. So the vote is 8 in favor, 1 opposed, no abstentions. Commissioner Anderson, if you'd care to restate, I think we already have your concerns on record, but that's your opportunity.
Absolutely, and I want to make it clear that, you know, I do respect the opinions of my fellow commissioners here, and I'm that close to agree with it. It's just the concern as you look not just at this building here, but potentially what could happen if we have the exact same mindset going forward, that, you know, individuality sometimes is not a good thing, especially from a planning standpoint. So I think another point is that I think sometimes we're just happy that, you know, new business comes into that and we'll accept whatever we get. I have a different mindset that, you know, we live in this community, so we should have some type of standards that we need to live by. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thanks, Commissioner Anderson.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes case 17021, and we will move ahead to case 17022, the 25th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. Yeah. And this case will require a public hearing, but I think first, since this is brought forward by City of Raymore, we'll hear the staff report first.
Thank you, sir. This case is a request for consideration of what would be the 25th Amendment to our Unified Development Code. This case stems from your discussion earlier this year on the annual review of the Unified Development Code. So most of what is proposed this evening, well, all of what is proposed this evening was discussed as part of your annual review. We have eliminated one specific item from the UDC amendment that we did talk about during the annual review, and I'll mention that in a moment. Anytime we do attempt an amendment to our code, it does require a public hearing. So we did advertise in our general newspaper for a public hearing this evening, and I do need to enter into the record our growth management plan, our Unified Development Code in its entirety, the notice of publication in the journal, and then the staff report that was submitted to you this evening. And as I mentioned, this amendment stems from our discussion on June 6th, where staff presented a number of items for consideration by the commission. Most of those items were what we felt were clarifications of the code. We had a couple of more significant changes to the code. One of those items specifically that we had identified was discussion on accessory dwelling units, where, if you recall, a few years back, we allowed accessory dwelling units in our large acreage residential tracts. We were proposing as part of the annual review to consider allowing it on more of our residential districts. Staff still supports that concept, but we felt that was such a big proposal that it needed to be separated out from all the code clarifications we were doing as part of the 25th Amendment. So you'll still see that come forward. It'll just come forward on its own, so it can have its own discussion and spend the time on that topic that we'll want to spend. So that was the one item we discussed at annual review that did not, if you would, make the cut for what staff is officially submitting as a 25th Amendment. So under staff comment number 2 in your report, we've identified the 19 separate revisions that are proposed. So in the ordinance that's submitted to you, what we are showing is 19 sections. So as you go through the staff report and identify, for example, section 1, that is actually section 1 of the official ordinance that, if there is a recommendation this evening, would move forward to the city council. What we do with the ordinance when we submit it to council is we use yellow highlight to identify any new language that would appear within the code, and then we strike through any language that we would propose to eliminate. It just makes it a little bit easier to try to go through the code section. Unfortunately, because of the complexity of the Unified Development Code, you're just seeing snippets, and sometimes you lose context a little bit. So certainly if there's any question on how the amendment fits into the bigger picture of that code section, staff can attempt to identify that. As part of the staff report, we have submitted proposed findings of fact on these amendments for your consideration. These findings go directly with amending the text of the code. And staff does recommend that the commission accept the proposed findings of fact and forward this case to the city council with a recommendation of approval. We can handle it any way you would like, Mr. Chairman, if you would prefer to open it up for questions. Again, each one of these items were identified as part of the annual review, so we have gone through each one of these. No substantial changes, I believe, to any of the items. Clarification based on commission comments from your annual review. We made some wording changes, but the context of the change really is not any different from what was submitted to you as part of the annual review. Certainly willing to go through item by item if we need to. I'll just leave it up to the commission.
Well, I'll pick up your answer in just a second. I think this is probably a good time to open the public hearing on case 17022, 25th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, and if anyone from the public wanted to speak on this case, this would be the time to come forward to the podium. And seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and that way we don't forget that somewhere later on. I'm agreeable to whatever commission would prefer. I have a couple of very specific questions about one of the 19 sections, and otherwise I thought they looked fairly familiar. So Personally, I'd be happy to go through them just in summary unless Commission wants to read through each one of them in detail. Commissioner Bowie?
I'm in agreement with you. I don't know that we have to go through each one of them unless everybody decides. I think we've gone through them before, unless there's something, a question about one or two.
Yeah, let me just ask, is there anyone on commission that particularly wants to go through line by line on these, or is everyone more or less comfortable and will just address specific questions? Okay. Specific questions.
Yep.
Okay. We're going to let you off easy. So if I may, I'll start. It turns out my question apparently is about Section 1. And then I got better. So, Mr. Fleming, I want your opinion on this as well. Okay, question has to do with, okay, in Section 1, keeping of animals, D2 seems to be fairly clear to me, and I'm just worried a little bit about an opinion. So if I read D2, it says chickens and fowl are permitted in agricultural or rural estate and in R1 district upon properties of at least 3 acres in size. So I'm not having as much trouble with that. My interpretation is that because they're larger to start with, that chickens and similar fowl are permitted in A or RE, period, and then they're permitted in R1, providing that the R1 property is at least 3 acres. Was that your opinion as well?
Yes.
Okay, so where I got into trouble, I think, was D3, and it may just be me getting wrapped around the axle. D3 says in the RE district and in the R1 district, upon properties of at least 3 acres in size, maximum number of animals permitted per grazing acre, blah, 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 R, and then 1 head of cattle, 2 sheep, 2 goats. So I'm not really worried about what's on the next page, but where I got a little bit hung up on this, it's number D3 is just a little different than D2. D2 is chicken, D3 is typically larger animals. I think my interpretation of D3 would be that the maximum number of animals is permitted in the RE district as stated with the counts there on the next page, and that maximum number of animals is only permitted in R1 on properties of at least 3 acres. So that my understanding would be that the 3 acre minimum applies only to R1 districts, does not apply to RE. I think it probably works out regardless, right? Because an RE is what minimum?
3 acres.
3.
Yes.
So I guess all I'm trying to, and in D3 on the larger animals, we're not stating any limits on an agricultural zoning.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think I just talked myself into this. Okay, sounds better. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't the only one with that understanding. Okay, the other concern actually in that same section, and I don't think it's a big concern, but at the bottom of the list, A, B, C, and D, cattle, sheep, goats, or horses, there's the statement, limits for other animals not enumerated herein shall be determined based upon type or size of animal. And that basically reverts back to staff and some common sense, right?
That is correct.
So pot-bellied pigs, I can't imagine we haven't already had questions about those.
We have. It actually is addressed in a separate section of code. It's actually in our animal control code where cats,
okay.
dogs,
Okay.
like animals are controlled,
Okay.
pot-bellied pigs are
So as you very astutely said a little bit ago, there's more to the code than just in this 25th Amendment.
correct.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Okay, that's all I had. Other commissioners, are there sections that,
Chair?
yes, Commissioner Sarsfield?
I have a little bit of problem with, also with Section 1D about the keeping of animals. We have cattle, horses, cows, sheep, goats, which are larger animals, opposed to chickens or fowl. Now, I did some different areas from people that live in different areas of Missouri and Oklahoma, because I happen to be down there, and my son has chickens. And they're allowed to have chickens in their property up to a certain size of their yard. It doesn't matter how big their yard is, but it's regulated per the size of the yard, but they're not allowed to have roosters. Because you have roosters, then you're multiplying, you know, you're getting more chickens and so forth and et cetera. Where most of the people that have chickens raise them for eggs, period. And since we're going into the next section, and I'm jumping around here a little bit, but it's still in the same, you have cattle, you have sheep, and you have goats, which are large animals, where fowl are smaller animals. Now, why 3 acres for a chicken, like I think I said at the last meeting? I have people, there's 11 dogs in front of me, 2 in back of me because the yards overlap each other, and it's on the left of me, and then 2 across the street. I don't know how many cats there are because you never see them, but there's around the yard. I don't see where 1 chicken would make a difference of the neighborhood having 1 St. Bernard and 2 German Shepherds. It's a lot smaller in size. I don't think chickens should even be in this whole category of the keeping of animals, because these are mostly large, 40, 50, 100 pounds and above type of critters, where a chicken is what? What's a hen weigh, as the old, you know, joke goes.
Sadly, I know that joke. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have
He's
laughed.
awake. So it doesn't even come into, the, in my opinion, the category of cattle, horses, sheep, goats. Not that they're 2-legged opposed to 4-legged, it's just in the size. But we can have dogs that weigh 40 and 50 pounds in the same neighborhood and have 11 of them around you, and there's no problem how big your yard is. So that part, I think, should be, in my opinion, the chickens should be in a separate category altogether. This is large farm animals, horses, sheep, and so forth. And that's the only squabble I have, because I like to have a couple chickens in my yard myself. And they don't make any more noise than all the dogs barking constantly as soon as you step out on your back porch. Any other comment from anyone else?
I'll make one quick comment. So I don't know that I've ever lived in close proximity to chickens, but I thought the concern with roosters was that they crow and wake everybody up early.
Right.
So
That's why I said roosters weren't allowed unless
Yeah.
you had 2 or 3 acres and
I
so
think
forth.
I have seen that in maybe other municipalities some years in the past, but
Get you city folks up early.
yeah, thank you,
You can't
Commissioner
sleep
Crane.
to 11.
Yes, Commissioner Armstrong, thank you.
Yeah, if I may follow up an affirmation, when we reviewed this at the annual review, that was one of my concerns as well. And I did look at the surrounding communities and their regulations, and actually Lee Summit has no limitation on the size of their lots. They do limit the number to 6 maximum, and if you have a hen house, then there are restrictions as to where that can be placed on the property. But I would agree that as far as limiting them to needing 3 acres, that's excessive.
Thank you. Other commissioners? I think
If I will, I got one.
Yeah,
Just wanna-
Commissioner Boyd.
And I'm not on this same topic. I don't want to disclose.
I was gonna say, I don't think we're specifically locked into the section 1, so feel free.
Okay, quick point. I think it's page, looks like 3 of this particular case. But in terms of restaurant, outdoor patio dining areas, patio areas adjacent to vehicle access, is there and I might have missed this in the code, but is there a height to the barrier that has to be between an outdoor patio and vehicles?
There would be, sir. There's a specific height for the railing, and honestly, sometimes you don't even notice they're there, but most of our restaurants now are having the outdoor patio areas and are having these fences of different sorts, railings, et cetera. But yeah, there's a very specific range of height that the railings must be if they are required.
Okay. It came up because we were at the Mexico Viejo, the new restaurant here, and we were looking at the outdoor patio they have, which there's railing there, but I'm just not sure about the height-wise.
Yes.
And I'm sure it does meet it, but it came up as I was looking at this as well, so I just thought about it.
It does, because that one came through. I remember the building official specifically requiring access with aisles, and so the height must have met the requirement.
So the height, and I see it because the height is not here, but the height is in the code somewhere.
It is in the building code aspect, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Good. Other questions? Mayor Turnbow?
Well, back on the original topic,
Sure.
Jim, could you kind of recap again for us? Because I know we'd had a specific conversation about this with regard to agriculture, residential estate, and then allowing R1, that since we already allowed 3 acres and above, is naturally going to have that in agriculture or residential estate properties to do that, that we were going to allow, since, I mean, if we'd already allowing it for those size properties, we were just to include R1, and once it exceeded that, then the other restrictions as it relates to animal control went into play in R1 areas. So can you kind of recap, I mean, if I haven't already, can you kind of recap that again?
Yeah, yes, sir. The topic of animal control, of course, has come up at different levels. Planning and Zoning Commission has. We've had this discussion in years past. City councils had the discussion on the keeping of chickens on residential lots, very specific, just like, you know, Commissioner Armstrong, you mentioned Lee Summit. Belton passed a very similar ordinance where they allow it. Many communities allow it, many communities prohibit it. As far as the proposal before you this evening, with the decisions and the discussion that's happened in the past, staff didn't propose to change what had been decided by the council. And it was done a number of years ago. Doesn't mean it can't be brought up again for discussion. But so we didn't propose a change to the specific prohibition of chickens. What we proposed was the fact that we all had determined that certainly allowable within our agricultural district, so that's not under discussion. We decided to allow it in our rural estate because that was the intent of creating that zoning class. We created a 3-acre minimum, and it was because it's a different atmosphere, if you would, on acreage property, and felt that we needed to allow limited number of animals on acreage property. That's why we have the limits per acre. But we have a number of properties that are zoned R1 that have large acreage associated with them. And so we felt the reason for bringing this even for discussion at all from staff's viewpoint was, let's allow, if we have R1 zone property of at least 3 acres, why wouldn't we allow it there if we allow it at RE of properties of at least 3 acres? So that was the reason for bringing the change forward this evening, not to stifle any discussion. Certainly, it's always good discussion because I think, like I said, several communities since we last discussed it now allow it on residential properties. But the purpose this evening was simply to look at the acreage of R1 zone properties. So, but certainly any direction the commission would give this evening can be amended into the proposed ordinance. So if you decide to allow it on all properties, limit the number per acre, we can certainly draft this any way that you see as appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Carteret.
Can I proceed with another question I have?
Yes, of course, Mayor Turnbow.
Okay, going on to section 16 as it relates to a proposal requires that proposed street names comply with the city addressing policy. Really, is there a city addressing policy? Yep. I mean, as a first responder for the last, well, I came here in '99, and it was different than the community I'd come previously. We had numbered and named that crisscrossed, where it was fairly easy to memorize that. Does a policy at all address any numbering of streets to allow for some kind of, I mean, we brought it up earlier in the other code that we wanted some consistency. That seems like that is consistently inconsistent on how that operates. I mean, new names pop up. They're short 3 and 4 house streets. They're not contiguous with another street 6 blocks to the east or west, north or south. It just, I mean, our policy doesn't seem to have much consistency to it with regard to how we number or name. I wouldn't be offended if I lived on a numbered street. I mean, why do we feel the necessity to name every street?
Great comment, great question. We do have an addressing policy. It's been adopted, I should say fairly recently, within the last 10 years, about 10 years old now. And I don't disagree with the street number system in Kansas City and other communities works outstandingly well. You know exactly where you need to find a particular location. I think the dilemma we have in Raymore, we certainly wouldn't prohibit a developer from using a numbered system. That would fall into the overall region's numbering system. But Raymore, since its inception, has developed under the street name system. And so we had to, that is obviously the preference of what developers want to do. Not saying we can't go the other direction, but following up on how Raymore has historically developed, we wanted to create the policy that made it clear so there wasn't confusion for our emergency providers. So we're very clear on the use of prefixes and suffixes for streets, when you can use court and cove, when you can use lane and street, naming when street names have to be unique because it is only a block or 2 long and doesn't connect to anything else. We have to be able to know we can send an emergency personnel to the exact location and not be confused. Well, this street doesn't connect. Why is the name the same when it's not connecting? So that's what the policy tried to clean up the mess that we had been handed, from this historical development under street names. And unfortunately, it'd be very difficult to go back and correct some of the street names that we have because there certainly are conflicts. Eagle Glen's a great example where we have northwest Glen, and you're using prefixes entirely incorrectly in that subdivision. That really led to doing the policy because we couldn't tolerate that anymore. So I don't disagree with the numbering system. It would be a lot easier if we had gone that way. But and what Lee Summit does with their quadrants, a lot easier to find properties within Lee Summit because of the quadrant system they have. But what we are attempting to do with this amendment is simply reference that we do in fact have that adopted policy.
Okay. And what is the bulk of that policy? What does that policy say? That it just names that don't conflict or rhyme with one another or whatever it is.
It does.
I'm still confused about that.
Yes.
What the actual policy, how it clears up anything.
What it does is it certainly doesn't allow duplication of street names or even street names that are in close, spelled closely or pronounced closely to an existing street name. So when somebody hears it, they can't associate where that's at. We take a look at what street names are being used in other communities so there's not a conflict with communities that are close by. We reserve street names. So if a subdivider like Creekmore, when they first came in, they had a whole list of street names for their subdivision. We reserved all those street names for that development. And so when a new proposal comes in, we allow the developer to just, come up with names, and then we'll go through our existing street names, our reserved street names, make sure there's not going to be any conflicts, and then that's when we present it forward to the commission and council for these are the proposed street names to be adopted. So it does closely look at, again, making sure we're not creating conflict with existing street names. A subdivision you recently saw, the Heritage Hills subdivision behind the post office, that was platted with street names that have been now used elsewhere. So you'll see a street name change having to be done for these unbuilt streets where they move forward because we can't have that duplication in separate parts of the city. So that's what the policy works to try to clarify to the best of its ability.
It's been a while since I've seen it. I know I've seen and studied the street naming. And to be real simplistic about it, the strike-throughs there on 13B and C are part of that policy, but I think it goes really quite a ways beyond that. I remember a lot more detail.
It does go much further than that. And yes, it's being stricken here because it's covered specifically in the policy. And perhaps now we have a lot of new commission members, it would be a good time for us to include that in your package just so you all can see what the policy actually says. I think it's 20 to 25 pages, so it's not terribly cumbersome, fairly easy to go through and comprehend what we are trying to do, not only in street naming, but actually addressing of properties as well.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Any further comments on street names or other topics?
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Commissioner Pfizer first, I think.
I understand the street name problem because we're on Southeast Glen. Across the street is Northeast Glen. A block away is Northwest Glen and Southwest Glen.
Oh,
So
wow.
we tend to deliver packages to our neighbors a lot and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to explain that it's Southeast Glen, not Southeast Glen. So it's always fun. But my question is about the roof-mounted solar energy systems.
Which paragraph?
That would be section 6 on page
Thank you.
5. Page 5. And I've been reading a lot about the Tesla solar roof panels, and I just wonder if something like that works into this. I know that they're becoming more popular, but I'm sure it's going to be a while before we really start seeing them around. But if I were replacing my roof, I would love to replace it with something like that. And it covers the whole roof, even though all of the panels are not solar. Some are glass and some are, they have a variety of styles, so they don't all look like, glass panels all over your roof. But is something like that permissible with this? Is that kind of in this?
Very good question, and you actually might be able to provide me with some clarification on that, because I haven't heard of that technology quite yet. If I'm correct, are those the ones that, the solar capability is incorporated into the shingles or the roofing material itself?
Yeah,
is what you're
they
getting at?
replace your shingles,
Okay.
basically.
Very good question then. I would assume that those would be permitted. I think the intention of putting these regulations in place were that, your typical solar panel installations are, equipment that's placed on top of a roof in addition to the shingles and other, structural elements that go on a roof. So these regulations are in place to make sure that they're in the right place where the roof can support those. They take into consideration the appearance of, how they interact with your neighbors, what they're going to look like. But certainly if they're incorporated into a shingle, you wouldn't necessarily know the difference between one of those solar panel shingle and a regular shingle.
Right.
So to answer your question, yes, those could be incorporated into this ordinance as well.
Okay.
To better clarify the use of that type of technology.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
even if it were more than, I don't know, it kind of like, if you go to their website and you put in like your address, it'll say 50% of your roof should be solar panels and the rest just panels. And so, I don't know how accurate that is, but I just didn't know if something like that, because I think it's, it looks great in the pictures. Now, I haven't seen it in person, so I don't know that it really looks like, there were different tiles, like tile roofs and, shingles or just glass panels. So they look great in pictures.
Absolutely, and like I said, it's hard to tell from the pictures.
Right.
You could, if 50% of the roof is recommended to be solar powered, what does that look the same as the other 50% that's not solar powered?
It does in the pictures.
In the pictures,
And,
right. So, as
yeah.
we move forward, that is definitely something we can look at.
And
how this.
it's pretty, I think, it's not real commonplace yet. I mean, it's pretty new, so.
Sure. Absolutely. Well,
remains
staff will
to see
definitely
how
take a
it'll
look
be.
at that and see if we can incorporate it into this ordinance. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you. Good variety of questions. Other questions, topics to discuss?
I actually had some questions on the solar-mounted.
Yeah, Commissioner
roofs as well. demarcations that the panels can only be on non-street facing roof areas. Can you speak to the rationale behind that? I'm assuming it's aesthetics.
Yes, that is correct, and how it interacts with your neighbors in the street front. Obviously, there might be some instances where maybe the south-facing roof is the only one that gets sun during the day, and so installing solar panels on the back roof might not be feasible. So certainly there might be some leeway that staff could get. The applicant could apply for a variance to that application if they so choose. There would certainly be some flexibility in that. They wouldn't be strictly limited to only their rear-facing roof or a side-facing roof. But the purpose of putting it there would be for aesthetic purposes. That would be sort of our first choice for them to explore. If that was not feasible on the rear-facing roof, then they could apply for a variance to put it on the front of their house if they needed to.
I just would encourage consideration. I went looking because when we start putting restrictions on this, especially if you're talking about metering, that limits the amount of benefit that you can get. I mean, if you're saying you can only use half the roof, then you're losing half of that potential.
Sure.
And so I went looking for anything that would document that it's not aesthetically pleasing. Now, I know personally that may vary from individual to individual, but I can't find anything that substantiates that in the literature. Do we have anything locally that does?
I don't believe so, and you're right. It varies from person to person on what is aesthetic pleasing, And most of this came from, I did a lot of research of surrounding communities, Lee Summit, Blue Springs, and other communities that are doing the same type of work, and we work really closely with Mid-America Regional Council, who sort of coached us through this whole solar panel process. So a lot of the work that came out of this was taken from our comparison cities and surrounding communities. And to speak to your point about you're sort of putting restrictions on where they can put these panels on the roof limits the power that they could potentially produce and save in their installation or their energy production. I don't think it's really typical for installations to be on multiple sides of the roof, just because there's typically one spot where it's the optimal location where the sun shines for the majority of the day. And in my research, different installation companies and plans that I've seen, it's mostly common to have it on one section of the roof, whether that's the south-facing roof, the one that faces the street. There's usually one specific location where it makes the most sense for that to be located. So I don't think the intention of that was to limit the production of where they can put it. I think the intention of it was, like you said, aesthetically pleasing, or the aesthetics of the appearance of it, if that makes sense.
It does, but while the intent may not have been to limit, the effect does. I mean, once you put that block in there, you are going to limit what can be done, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy then. And I looked, Kansas City puts out what the surrounding communities' restrictions are. The majority don't have that type of restriction on the rooftop mounted solar panels, at least that I could find.
That you couldn't find, okay.
Their breakdown did not, I think there were 3 communities that had limitations to the location of the placement.
Sure, absolutely. Well, like I said, that was just a product of the research that I did, and obviously maybe I should have done a little deeper, or maybe got a better selection of cities. So I respect that you did your research. I respect that very much, and thank you for bringing that up. So certainly, as Mr. Carteret mentioned, we can tweak these any way that the commission would like us to do that. If you would like us to be a little more lenient on where we're allowing those to be placed, certainly we are able to do that. If that would be the opinion of the commission, absolutely.
Okay. I had a second follow-up question on 1E. I understand the intent behind looking for safety in the structure to support the weight of the roof, which certainly needs to be addressed. But do we need to provide any further clarification about what type of proof or what type of assessment? It's somewhat vague.
Yes, and that information is actually included in the application itself. There's an entire form that the applicant would fill out, and it's then reviewed by our building official, and then inspected by our building inspector as well prior and after the inspection or the installation of the solar panels.
Okay.
So it's clarified elsewhere in another code.
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Boyd?
No more questions, but does Dairy Queen have a, I'm back on this outdoor patio thing, I'm sorry, but does Dairy Queen have?
That would be one that would not. They have a table out on that island, and they do not have a railing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, just,
So if they wanted to do for a new facility coming in, that would require a railing.
okay, the new facility.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I was just, my head was turning, I'm sorry.
It's a good question. Still relevant. Commissioner Anderson.
Don't know if there's any more questions from the commission, but I'll make a motion.
That's fine, we can still ask questions about the motion, so
Absolutely.
feel free.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the staff proposed findings of facts in forward case 17022, 25th Amendment to the UDC, to the City Council with a recommendation of approval.
I'll second that.
Okay. Thank you. So motion by Commissioner Anderson, second by Commissioner Pfizer to accept staff proposed findings of fact on case 17022, 25th Amendment to the UDC, and forward to City Council with a recommendation of approval. Does that sound about right? Sure. Okay. Is there any further discussion on the motion? And I guess I will discuss for a moment. The one thing that I heard that did not seem to be particularly settled was the roof-mounted solar under renewable energy systems. And I guess I'm thinking, Mr. Fleming, I like to put you to work, but I'm thinking, you know, there's several different ways that we could handle this. We could approve the case as worded, and if that facing the street becomes an ongoing problem, and there is already an escape clause in there, but if it becomes an ongoing problem, then we simply do the 26th Amendment to the UDC. Or if we had alternate wording for, I guess it's like I-1B, roof-mounted solar energy. If we had alternate wording, we could propose that as an amendment to the motion on the floor. What are my other options, Mr. Fleming? Amend the motion on the floor, vote it the way it is, and then defer any further changes till later?
If there's a third way, I'm not thinking of it. I
Okay,
think
so
you've
those are the two
identified.
obvious. Yeah, so I just wanted to throw that out to commission as possibilities.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor
I'd
Furbo.
actually like to make a motion to amend the motion to exclude Section 1 and Section 6 pending further review by staff, and that all other sections remain in place at this time. That would be my motion for amendment.
Second.
Who was that? Crane? Commissioner Crane? Okay. So we have an amendment to the motion by Mayor Turnbow, second by Commissioner Crane, to exclude sections 1 and 6. And if anyone needs a reminder, that's chickens and solar. Solar chickens, wait a minute.
Well, and to discuss that motion, since it's been made and seconded, the reason I'm making it is that there have been some really good discussions about what's going on in communities around us, and I think maybe a little bit more investigatory effort on the part of staff with regard to those concerning what the comments were from members of the commission here tonight. Take those into consideration and see if there's something that can be done that to those particular sections that would make it more palatable to this group, because I think there was great discussion up here tonight about those two items, so that's why I made the motion to amend.
Hey, and you got a second.
And I got a
So
second.
obviously, someone else agreed. So is there any further discussion on the amendment to the motion? Otherwise, we'll take a vote. So the amendment by Mayor Turnbow, second by Commissioner Crane, was to exclude sections 1 and 6 from the action on the 25th Amendment tonight. Further discussion?
I think I understand and I do agree on section 6. So what was outstanding on section 1?
Conversation on perhaps number of chickens or
The size of the
roosters
property.
or-
The size of the property, because other communities have because it does seem to be a trend for collecting eggs at home, that they're and they're making chicken coops right up here at Tractor Supply
Oh.
that are like a home-based little production firm for that. And some communities have recognized that. Belton has, Lee Summit has. I don't think we're unlike our neighbors that much in the area here. So I think maybe some consideration can be made. We reduce it to an acre or depending the size of the actual lot, one per so many square thousand square feet or something to that effect. That's merely what I was suggesting, that we maybe research it a little bit
So
more.
to clarify, we weren't saying no to 1 and 6, we were simply deferring those for some additional study. by
Understood.
staff.
I just need some
Yeah.
clarification
No,
on
it's-
that particular.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with the
Mr.
amendment. Yeah.
You might
Commissioner
include in
Crane.
that, there's people that got rabbits and hutches in the backyard. There's more than just chickens.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
I'm good with it.
Any further discussion on the amendment to the motion? So what we're voting on now is to exclude sections 1 and 6 from the 25th Amendment to the UDC.
Yep.
Right? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And that's unanimous. So the case, as it continues, that was 9 in favor of the amendment, none opposed, no abstentions. So now we still have a motion on the floor to accept case 17022, 25th Amendment, minus sections 1 and 6. And is there any further discussion on those non-controversial sections? Otherwise, okay, let's take a vote on the original motion as amended. All those in favor of, let's see, now, so the motion was to accept case 17022, 25th Amendment to the UDC and forward to City Council with the recommendation of approval, now minus sections 1 and 6. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 9 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. So, sorry, staff, you get to work on a couple of sections a little bit more, but I think that's good. Thank you, and that concludes new business. Mr. Fleming, are you in a position to give us a city council report?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The city council has convened, I think, on 2 separate occasions since planning and zoning convened last, and there are a couple of issues to bring to your attention. The first is that I believe on July 10, City Commission voted unanimously in favor of the request to approve, for approval of the Cunningham at Creekmore second plat. This issue came before this body, I believe, on June 6th, and the Planning and Zoning Commission voted unanimously 9-0. Cooper Land Development is requesting approval of the Cunningham at Creekmore plat, a 36-lot, single-family subdivision located on the southwest corner of 155th and North Street, and the City Council approved that. Secondly, there was an issue with regard to residential waste collection. The current contract between the city and Town and Country Disposal Services expires December 31 of this year. January 1, well, the staff put out a joint request for proposal in partnership with the City of Belton. And effective January 1, Jim's Disposal Service will now provide those services to Raymore. Finally, the City Council addressed the issue of delinquent water bill accounts. In a number of cases, it has been observed that some commercial developers in developing properties and areas have had access to water, and they turn the water on and they use the water and they sell the property, and then no one pays that particular portion of the bill. City Council has deemed that in order to get a building permit in the future, the developer must make payment and pay up any outstanding bills that are owed. So that's it. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to address them, and in the event I can't, Mr. Carteret will.
Nicely done. Thank you, Mr. Fleming.
I had a quick question.
Sure. Commissioner Boyd.
That remedy, the remedy you just mentioned in terms of the developer paying water bills, was there anything else tossed around besides that? Any other ideas other than that? That would mean you would have to have a repeat developer, somebody that came back and wanted to develop something else. So I'm just saying, was there anything else that was tossed around in terms of a remedy for those water bills that remain outstanding?
There are other methods that the city utilizes to collect on delinquent accounts. What had occurred in a discussion was council members noticed that some of our more active builders in the community had delinquent water bill accounts. Wondering which happens. I mean, they have a number of finished homes, maybe they haven't sold, and they're watering the grass to keep it alive, and just for whatever reason haven't caught up on that bill. What council wanted to have occur, though, is that, but we continue to issue permits for new homes when they're delinquent on bills. Or another example is not just water bills, it's any delinquent money owed to the city. If we install sidewalk on an undeveloped lot, and that lot has an assessment that hasn't been paid, and now somebody wants to build a home on that lot, they need to pay that assessment. There's money owed to the city. But there are other methods we do for a collection of delinquent accounts. This was just one minor item. Council felt that if we have a few builders, and it's not prevalent, don't get me wrong, but there's a builder or two out there that has delinquent bills, and some of the bills could be a few dollars. We're not talking thousands of dollars per se. We're talking just a lot of delinquent accounts paid up, and then we'll issue the permit. So it was just another tool the council wanted to have available.
And I would say that, I mean, the city has options. The city could sue for money owed. This is certainly not as confrontational as a lawsuit.
Any other questions about council report? All right, Mr. Carteret, Mr. Gress, Mr. Eanes, I guess we'd like to hear the staff report then.
Thank you, sir. Just briefly, we'll go over our upcoming meeting schedule. Looks like we'll be meeting for a few months to come. Business is picking up. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 1st, and we'll have a site plan that evening. It'll be for the Raymore Storage Center. This is from local business owner Todd Glidewell. Todd owns the American Self-Storage Units. He's come before Planning Commission several times. He owns Smith Hardware. He purchased a tract of land that happened to be zoned industrial between Ramblewood and Falcon Crest. And he's going to bring forward a site plan to develop that property for self-storage facilities. On August 15th, we now have a case that will be considered that evening. And this is a case that you recently considered. In fact, Chairman Faulkner, you brought it up this evening. A few months back in May, the commission considered the rezoning of the Heritage Hills area that had been previously platted. And there was, in fact, there was a recommendation for denial on that request. And part of the explanation reasoning given that the applicant heard was there wasn't a master plan for the other area that you still owned. We didn't know what was going on. You came in and rezoned one piece. Now you're rezoning another piece. Let's get a master plan together. So the applicant placed a hold on that application after the meeting of the Planning Commission. It still has not gone to City Council. What the applicant is doing is he's resubmitting the request back to the Planning Commission, so we have to go back through the public hearing process. And he has submitted a master plan now for that development that he wants to present as part of his request. His request will be the same, looking at R2 for that south portion. And he's not requesting rezoning at this time for the east portion, but what he's bringing forward to you is the master plan that shows what his intent is for the entire property. So that public hearing will be on August 15th. And then September 5th, our commission will have a public hearing. This will be on the capital improvement program as part of the city's fiscal budget. Mr. Feuerborn, city manager, will be here to present what is the capital improvement program for the next 5 years. Well, he'll go over the projects that specifically looking at funding through next year's proposed budget. A requirement as part of the process is the public hearing by the commission. Typically, that's because the proposal usually includes infrastructure improvements to serve development. So we always want planning commission input on those proposals. So that'll be your September meeting. So that is what we currently have scheduled as far as cases before the commission. And that will conclude my part of the staff report, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Eanes.
Thank you, Mr. Catterett. Mr. Eanes.
I just want to give you some updates on the current projects that are going on. The bid opening for the stormwater repair project will be July 27th. The mill and overlay for 2017 will start around July 24th. Municipal microsurface, which is the microsurface around the circle, will start around July 29th. And Gore Waterline is going real well, and we're looking at it being complete around August 4th. I would like to thank you all. This will be my last meeting for the Planning and Zoning Commission, so it's been a pleasure to serve. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Eanes. We will miss you. And thank you. Okay. I guess we'll move ahead. Public comment. I don't see any public out there. So I suppose we shall move ahead to commission member comment. Commissioner Bowie, can I start with you?
Well, where are you going?
I'm going to be part of a consultant team that works for the Kansas City Overflow program for the city of Kansas City.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your service, for sure. A couple of comments. First thing is, I'm looking at our June 2017 building permit activity, and just noticing that, you know, we got quite a bit of, I'm sorry, I'm too low, sorry, quite a bit of commercial activity, so that's good. That's a good thing, and it's growing. It's going slow, but we're growing, and we're getting there. New website looks good, by the way. I think that looks really sharp. I don't know how new that is. I mean, I just hadn't been on there in a while, but looks really good. A lot of good information on there. Leveraging of our technology in our meetings is good, so that we can kind of have this in front of us to go through. So appreciate that coming up and looking good for us in terms of maps and being able to look through things as we talk. So. Other than that, no other comments. That was enough, right?
No, thank you.
No other closing comments. Thank you, guys.
All right. Commissioner Meiske.
Yeah, Godspeed in your endeavors. Thanks for serving and helping us out. Hope I didn't put you on the spot too many times. And that's all I had.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Armstrong.
Well, congratulations. And I apologize for the controversial solar chickens, and I appreciate your consideration.
Yep. Commissioner Anderson.
I think I want to echo the rest of the comments regarding Mr. Eanes. I know it's tough, but I think this is probably an exciting part of your life and your journey. So best of luck to you, and I want to commend staff as well. I know we have a lot of discussions and a lot of back and forth, but I just want to make it clear that I appreciate all you guys do. You guys do quite a bit, so you have to deal with me once a month, so I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you. Vice Chair Fizer.
I'd just like to say good luck, and if you get lonely and miss us, you can always come back to one of our meetings, and we'd be happy to see you.
Of course. Secretary Crane.
Mr. Eanes, I served on commission long before we got reports from engineering, and believe you me, your reports have been well appreciated by myself. And I hope we get somebody who will come every time, and good luck in the future, and hope your new job pans out good.
Thank you, Mr. Eames. I've only known you for a short time, but you've been very helpful, and every time I asked a question of you in public or private or whatever, what to do here and where to go, what direction to point me in, since I was new to all this, and you never missed your mark. And take care, and God bless, and I hope you have a much success. And that is solar railings for the chickens, just to make things clear.
Oh, my. Oh, my. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Sarsfield. Mayor Turnbow.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Ed, we're going to miss you. Thank you for everything you've done for the city. You've been a tremendous asset, and you're a super nice guy, too, so we're going to miss you around here. I want to thank the staff tonight for their work on the 25th Amendment of the UDC Code. We might have removed a couple of items, but there were 17 things that just got right through there. That's good. 17 out of 19 is not bad. But I appreciate the commission's input tonight on that. It does help the elected body make the right decisions, and I really do appreciate the work that staff does on that. Thank you, guys. With regard to the trash service, I know there's been some controversy, especially in the city of Belton, not so much in Raymore, but the city of Belton's had some real issues going on over there. You know, we're going to be going into a very long education program that's going to let folks know what the differences are and actual additional things that we're going to get with this new contract that will be beneficial. The cost increase was nominal. We were expecting one anyway had we stayed with the present, and actually if we'd picked their bid it would have been much higher. But so we are confident that Jim's Trash Service will help us put out an education program between now and the first of the year. There'll be about a 5-week transition of can removal and replacement. Separate contracting entity will be doing that. So it'll be a transition. I can't guarantee it'll be smooth, but we're hoping that the way it's planned out, it looks like it's going to be a smooth transition. And the cans that we're going to get are actually bigger. I was looking at mine the other day, and it's like 68 and 45, and you can get 275-gallon cans now. If you don't want that size, you can make arrangements with Jim's Tow for a different size can for recycle and regular waste. So that is, that is going to be an opportunity for folks to be able to put out stuff in addition to that without having to, they'll still take bags off the street next to the cans, but all that's part of the education program to come. I just want to let you know that the transition here in the city is going to be very smooth since we've been doing it for a number of years, and we're confident that Jim's service will give us a good product. The RAC, or the Recreational Activity Center, groundbreaking ceremony was at 4:30 this afternoon over at Rec Park. Went very well. We're looking for that project to start shortly and be done by fall of 18. That project will give us a large gymnasium with the 3-lane track around it, and it'll house a lot of our indoor programs, volleyball, basketball, youth programs, adult and senior programs as well, that they're intending to bring to the park system. So the whole program opportunities within the park system for organized sports is going to grow exponentially. And as anticipated, as we think it's going to grow, we have designed the building to actually double in size at a fairly economical rate if need be. So there is planning efforts for that should our projections hold out as to what we're hearing from folks and what they plan to do there at the activity center. So we're excited about that project going. And in about 5, 6, 7 weeks, somewhere around there, we plan on, we'll probably be doing another groundbreaking ceremony as they get the details done for the new amphitheater at Hawk Ridge Park. So that project will be running in tandem. So we're excited about that moving forward as well. And Mod Pizzas, I want to let you know, Mod Pizza's ribbon cutting is July the 26th. I think it's at 11 a.m. I'm not sure. I don't have my, I got my calendar here. I guess I could tell you. I'll shut up and then let you know because it probably will take, it won't take me a while to get there. We'll see what that is at, 26 at 11:15 a.m. So it's 11:30 actually is the ribbon cutting. I'll get there a little bit earlier than that, but we're excited about the Cadence project moving forward. Firehouse Sub signs were put up today, I see. They look good, so Firehouse Sub will be having hopefully a ribbon cutting here fairly soon. And is there a projected date on their occupational permit?
There's not on Firehouse. They still have some interior work to finish. Okay. Qdoba should be finished here. Well, we're doing a final inspection, so that's done as well.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you, sir. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think based on discussion again tonight about what am I trying to call them, master plans or area plans, compatibility and all that, I don't feel like it would be too unreasonable. I don't think there's any urgency, but will staff kind of look into that as time permits, just with an eye to potentially, we're looking, I feel like we've got a gap in code where the issue of individual site plans, things like that, on previously platted lots, we're already past the stage of dealing with the with a master plan for the area. So I'm not sure that there's an easy solution to that, but just it in my recollection, it's come up frequently enough, and actually come up with commercial and residential tracts as well. So in your spare time, can you investigate that further? And I'm not necessarily looking for a case or a proposed amendment at this time, but just some research that can come back to commission later this year.
Absolutely, you can definitely do that.
Okay, I just don't want you to get bored. Mr. Eanes, we will certainly miss you. I second the comments that other members of the commission have made. We will certainly miss you. Wish you the best of luck. Staff, as always, we could not do this job without you. Thank you for your hard work. I like the way Mayor Turnbow said, well, 17 out of 19 is not bad. And in fact, the other 2 will come back to us. So, I think it's worth the time to try to make it the best effort possible, especially since that work goes to City Council. They're a critical audience. And thank you for your support. Unless any of the commission have other comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I didn't hear a first. Okay, I think I'll give Commissioner Anderson the motion and Commissioner Bowie the second. And before you start running out the doors, all those in favor raise a hand, please. And I'm pretty sure I count at least 9 hands. Thank you.
Chris, have you ever been to Salt Lake City? Have you traveled around much, sir?